Hello and welcome to another tutorial presented by aetuts.com. My name is Grayson Honan, and today, as I'm sure you already know, we're going to be designing a microscope's field of view. So let's take a look at the shot that we're going to try and replicate. Okay, here we are in Photoshop, and we can see this cell is open, and this cell is just the outline that we're going to use later in After Effects for the particular plugin. So I'm just going to walk you through how to create this particular shape. That's not a pun, by the way. And feel free to make your own shape, though. This isn't really anything that you'd find in nature, I don't think. But you have full creative range, so make whatever shape you want. It won't affect your ability to follow along with the tutorial. So let's go up to File, New, and we're going to hit the width, and we're going to change that to 600 pixels, height to 600 pixels, resolution 72, that's fine, and we're going to hit OK. And then we're going to come down to the ellipse tool, and if you don't have the ellipse tool, just click and hold on that button and change it to ellipse and then let go. We're going to come up here to the upper left corner almost, and we're going to hold down Shift, and we're going to click and drag. And then I'm pressing down space so that I can actually move the circle I just made. So that's 3 buttons in total. And we just want it to take up a little bit less than half of the document height. And then let go of your mouse button, then let go of your keyboard buttons, and you have that circle. So now I'm changing to the arrow button, or the arrow tool I should say, and we're just going to hold down Alt, click and drag on the circle we just made, and if you're having trouble keeping it aligned, hold down Shift as well. So that's another 3-button combination, and we just want the circles to sort of overlap just a little bit there, and then we can let go of the mouse button, let go of the keyboard buttons, and we have a duplicated circle on a white background. So this isn't the final shape that I actually made. We want to sort of fill this gap right here with some black. So let's take the pen tool by pressing P or just clicking on pen, and we're going to click here, and we're going to come down and click here and hold. And this is, you'll note, sort of similar to the masking tool in After Effects. And we just want to create that curve by clicking and holding. And then we're going to come over here, and we're going to do a similar thing. And we're going to close it. And now we're going to go over to the Path tab. If you don't have the Path tab, just go up to Window and change to Paths. So, whoops, we're going to hit on the work path, right click, hit on Make Selection, and we're not going to change anything in this dialog box. Just make sure your feather radius is 0 and hit OK. And now we can see we have a selection made, signified by the running ants. So go back to your layers and create a new layer by pressing this button here. And what we want to do is fill this area with black, right? So let's change the foreground color to black if you need to, and hit OK. And we're going to hit Alt Backspace on the keyboard to fill that area with black. Now all we need to do is get rid of this background layer, because we do want this to be on transparent background. So go up to File, Save As. We're going to change this to a ping, and you can see I already have a molecule here, but we're going to overwrite it, and we're going to hit OK and ignore the interlacing options, and now we have the first element that we need before we go into After Effects. So let's now go to the second element by going up to File, New. Again, change your width to 600, not 60, and the height to 600, and hit Enter. And now we're going to change from the ellipse tool down here to the custom shape tool, and we have this arrow here, but in case you don't, just click this little button here, and then click this little button here, and hit All. And this will bring up all of the custom shapes that come preloaded with with Photoshop. And there are a ton in here, but what we want to find is a pretty good looking arrow. I liked this one. If you find another one that you like, or maybe you make one or find one online, feel free to use it. But don't try to create the arrow by going from the right to the left and then expecting to point up. That's what I did several times. What you need to do is just make it from the right to the left right there, and all you need to do is let go, and you have this shape already created. So that was fast. And hit Control T on your keyboard, or go up to Edit and go to Free Transform, and you'll get this box here. And we just want it to rotate approximately 90 degrees. If you're having trouble getting it to 90, again press Shift, and that will snap you to the closest increment. You got 60, 75, and 90. And we're going to move this down like this. And feel free to use the arrow keys to get it sort of precise in there, and then we're going to hit the check mark. So now we have this arrow. We're going to get rid of our background layer, and we're going to go up to File, Save As, change to Ping, and we're just going to call this arrow and hit Save. No interlacing. And now let's go over to After Effects and start some compositing. Here we are in After Effects, and the first thing we're going to do is import our molecule or cell, or whatever we're going to call it, and just hit Open, and then we're going to drag the file down to this little button here to create a composition with the same settings. So we have a 600 pixel by 600 pixel composition. And let's just go to the comp settings and adjust a couple other things. We want our frame rate to be 23.976, and our duration is going to be 15 seconds. So once you change those settings, hit OK. And let's drag on an effect. It's called fractal noise. Perhaps you're familiar with it. Drag it onto the molecule.ping, and you'll see the default settings for fractal noise take effect. So what we want to do is use an animation preset to get started here. So click on Animation Presets, go to Indigestion, and you will get something that looks like this. So indigestion actually comes with a couple keyframes automatically. So if you click on the molecule.ping layer and you hit U, you will get these keyframes. You'll notice they go to around 5 seconds. We want them to go all the way to 15. So highlight them all, click on them, and then press Shift so that we get them exactly on 15 seconds, and then let go. And now we are animated for a full 15 seconds. That's a weird preview. And that's exactly what we want to do for that with fractal noise. The preview, don't let it throw you off. It's just a little After Effects bug apparently. So in the Effects and Presets panel, let's go to Texturize and drag that on. And basically what I'm doing is I'm sort of creating a molecule or cell that has both an individual look to it by adding the fractal, and also we want sort of a texture. So what I usually do for textures is I go to a website called cgtextures.com. And if you go to their About page, you can figure out that many big companies actually use cgtextures.com because none of the images here are copyright. They can all be used for free with absolutely no attribution. So I am attributing right now, but if you go to the search and you go to leather, you get this this list here. I chose this one right here. It looked pretty good to me. And if you just go to the download link, you can get the largest one, but first you're going to have to sign up. But it's about 15 megabytes per month, and then you can just use whatever images you download for free. So jumping back into After Effects, what we're going to do is go to File, Import, File, choose our leather texture, and we're going to drag it in here. So let's close this up, put it on the bottom, and turn it off. And let's go back to the effects for molecule and go back to Texturize. So we see this texture layer here. We need to change this to the leather that we just added. And if we zoom up to 100% here, we can see that the texture that you can see in the background here on the texture layer is actually being added to the molecule. So what we want to do is maybe change the texture contrast to 0.5, and that'll make it a little bit less severe. And you can adjust the light direction. That just basically puts shadows in another area. But that is all we need to do with texturize. It just adds another little detail that makes the bacteria or cell a little bit more interesting to look at. So what we have here is a very flat looking image. So let's type in bulge in the effects and presets and add that to the molecule.ping. And bulge is just going to allow us to add a little bit of a 3D depth to the image that we're creating here. So when you add bulge, you get this box, and I'm just making it a little bit larger, and I'm going to move it up to the first half here, and we're going to line it up until it looks excellent. Okay, cool. So over to bulge, we just hit Control D to duplicate it, and then we're going to bring the other one down to the other side and just adjust it properly. And now we have bulge added. So this is our basic shape. We have the fractal, which allows us to have different particles looking different instead of all looking the same. We have the texture adding texture, and we have bulge making it look 3D. So let's go up to composition settings, and we're just going to call this cell and hit OK. And just to finalize this, let's add some color. So go up to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and go over to your effects and presets and hit Curves, and drag that over there. So with the curves, you can do whatever you like, but I'm just going to make mine sort of green. We're going to take some blue out, maybe, and take some red out. That looks cool. Okay. And now we're going to move on to the water. If you have any other changes that you want to make, feel free. Again, your cell does not need to look like mine. Okay, so go up to Composition, New Composition. We're going to have our width 1280, height is 720, frame rate is 23.976, duration is 15 seconds, and we're just going to make the comp name something called Water, and hit OK. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new solid with Control Y, and the color I chose is CBE5E7. That's just a color code that I'm using to be as close to the original as possible. So let's duplicate this solid and add fractal noise to the duplicated layer. And I'll just explain that the fractal here is going to actually drive the transparency of our water layer here. So let's change the name for this layer to water. And we're going to change this to transparency. Okay, so we just need to change some settings for the transparency layer. We're going to use an animation preset called Deep Tissue. And we're going to change the contrast to 315. The subsettings, we're going to change the subscaling to 118. And now you can see that is what our fractal looks like. So the white, if you're not familiar with track mats, is completely opaque, and the black is going to be transparent. So let's go down to our track mat and have that take effect. LumaMat Transparency. And if you don't have track mat, just click on your toggle switches down here. And now you can see that that has taken effect. So let's create a duplication of the transparency layer. And let's also create a new solid with Control Y, and the color doesn't matter. I'm just going to drag it underneath transparency here and apply fractal noise. So this layer right here, I'm just going to call texture, and it's going to add a texture to the water layer, and you'll see how that works in a second. So let's go to Animation Presets, and we're going to find something called Infection, and then we're going to go to LumaMat, and we're going to change the transfer mode to overlay. So if I preview this for you, you can see now that the texture is being applied to the water layer, and it actually sort of looks like water. And I'm sure there are better ways to do this, but this is the way that I came up with. So the last thing we need to do with the infection layer is actually just fix these keyframes here. Just drag these to the end, and we can just confirm that all of our other keyframes are also at the end. We can't forget that these presets do come with their own keyframes, so we do need to just adjust them so that we're animated for the full 15 seconds. So that wraps up the water layer, and we're just going to use this for our final comp that we're going to move to in a second. So I'll see you over there in just 1 second. Okay, so go up to Composition, New Composition. The composition name is going to be Full View. Width is 1280, height is 720. Nothing has really changed as far as the duration of frame rate goes, and we're just going to hit OK. So the first thing we need to do is create a new solid with Control Y, and we're just going to use a color code, again from the original. Feel free to change it if you'd like, though. We're going to hit OK. If you didn't catch that, it's 4A6B66. And we're going to import our water comp, and we're just going to drag it on top here, change the opacity with T to about 40%, and now you can see that the water is fully animated. So we can forget about the water for now, and let's create a particular solid. So we're just going to change the color to black. Color doesn't really matter, but just for the purposes of differentiation between the particles, or the layers, I'd like to make it black. And to save yourself some time, and to save myself from making mistakes, we're going to use an animation preset called Cells. And this is a preset that I will include with the project files, but if you are unfortunate enough to not have a subscription to AATuts Plus, I will run through the settings for your convenience. So you'll notice that nothing really shows up when we change to the Cells preset, and that's because our emitter is a layer and our particles are actually a sprite. So let's start by creating the layer emitter with Control Y, and we're going to change the color to white, and we're just going to call this solid emitter and hit OK. So I'm just going to use the ellipse tool here, and we're going to create an oval of sorts, and I'm using space to reposition it so that it looks centered, and that looks about right. So in order for particular to actually see the emitter layer as a valid layer for being an emitter, we need to change it to a 3D layer. So just press the 3D button here, and again toggle your switches if you don't see 3D. And the other issue that we might have is that particular does not see an ellipse here. It actually just sees this box. So what we need to do is just pre-compose this layer with Control Shift and C, and we're just going to leave all attributes there. Let's call this, just leave it as emitter and hit OK. And now we're all ready to use this layer as an emitter. So I just dragged it to the bottom there. I'll shut it off. And let's go into the emitter settings, and we're just going to change the layer emitter down here to emitter. And again, nothing will happen because we have a sprite set as our particle. So let's close this and open the particle subsection. And what we want to do is bring our cell down and just drag it underneath and turn it off. And let's change this layer to actually particular. And we're going to just change the texture subsection here to cell. And it's going to warn us that the layer is quite large and it's probably going to have an adverse effect on render times, but since our particles must pass close to the camera, we're just going to ignore that by pressing OK. And you can now see that we have our cells here. So you can opt to actually go back into your cell comp and make the fractal loop with just a few adjustments that I'm sure you can figure out yourself. And you can actually make the particle animated. I prefer not to do that, just simply because it does take longer to render, and as far as I know, you can't really see particles, or cells rather, moving, really. That would be crazy. So I just opted for still frame, but feel free to use loop or play once if you'd like. You just need to adjust the settings so that the fractal loops, so that you don't see a pretty distinct jump from the end keyframe to the beginning. So now that we are all set with our particles here, what we want to do is just focus on a small set of them. So let's go up to Layer, New, Camera, and we're just going to use 15mm as the preset and hit OK. And now you can see that our camera has just shifted the view slightly, but what we want to do is actually change our blur level here to 50% with depth of field on, and we want to just zoom up to the particles so that we have an interesting view of them. So let's see, that looks about right. And let's just change our focus distance here until the particles look like they're about in focus. That looks nice. And we're going to change the aperture to 200, say. And that will just make sure that if the particles are not on the focus plane, they will be plenty blurred out, and that'll look nice. So let's actually just adjust this a little bit more so that our midsection particles are in focus. And we're getting there. This one's in focus over here. That'll do for now. So if we just watch this animation here by previewing, we can see that there's just a little bit of a jump in at the beginning, and we can fix this by just moving our particular layer over a few keyframes and then dragging the end to the end, and that will completely null and void that jump in. It's not really a problem anymore. So if you would like to figure out why it does jump in, that's just simply because our keyframe, if we take a look at our keyframes here, are creating particles right up to the first keyframe of particular. So let's just drag this over a little bit more so that we can just create a nice smooth transition into our comp, and that's better. Okay, excellent. So that is the motion of our particles taken care of, and you can see the majority of the work is actually done by now. We just have a few extras to add in later. So let's take a look at the settings for particular, as I'm sure you're quite excited to figure out exactly how we did this. So let's go into emitter, and as I said earlier, I just have the particles per second keyframe to be 81 keyframe and then 0 the next. And I also have it set to pre-run for 1 second. And here's the velocity, 5,000. Velocity random is 5. Velocity distribution is 0. And velocity from motion is 0. Our emitter size in the z-axis is 26. And the layer emitter is just default settings, current time, and RGB particle color. So let's just close up the emitter subsection and go into particle. Our life is set to 50 seconds. No life randomness. Our texture is cell, and I just preferred to go with random still frame. That's just a personal preference, but if you would like to, as I was saying, just change that setting. If we go into rotation, you'll see that I have the random rotation set to 82, and that's just to make sure that if I set this to 0, our particles don't all look like they're facing the same direction. So 82 is a good number for me. Let's just close rotation here. Size is 83. No size randomness. No changes to size over life. It's just a solid red. No opacity changes. and that does it for particle. So let's go into shading, and the only change I made here was I turned shadowlet from main on, and if I just turn that off, you can see that we are missing quite a lot of the effect. The lighting does need to change for this to look as realistic as it does, so I just changed the shadowlet settings to 5, 225-ish, and to 130-ish. So that is shadowlet, and shading. For physics, I used the air physics model. Air resistance is 20, spin amplitude is 46, 50, spin frequency is 0.6, and these are all just the main settings that we would use to get the motion of our particles. And I sort of wanted them to look like they were sort of floating in water. They weren't moving too much on their own, but feel free to make them fly around busily or whatever you'd like. Physics is a pretty diverse section. You can get them looking to move in whatever way you'd like. So no auxiliary system. World transform is just used if you need to perhaps focus on another section, if you came up with a sparse selection of particles. You can just move it around until you find a good section to focus on. No visibility changes, and rendering, no changes here either. So let's just go up to the camera. In just a second, I'm going to show you the keyframes that I added. So I'll see you in just a second. Okay, so while you were out, I just found a good focus distance for us. It's about 600 pixels, and at 600 pixels you can see quite a lot of the particles are in focus. So let's just keyframe our focus distance until we get to 600 pixels. And if you're familiar with focusing a microscope, you know that there are a few knobs that you need to turn, and it takes a few seconds to get it to the right level. So let's start out at maybe 100 pixels, and that'll hopefully blur us out pretty well. Yeah, that looks good. And then let's move forward a few keyframes here, maybe until 1 second. And we're going to really overshoot it. Let's go to 1500. And then we'll ramp it back real quickly to 490. And then we'll just take a little bit longer to get back to 600 pixels. And that's just a cute little animation that we're going to use to make it look like the microscope is being focused. So let's change to Easy Ease, and I know this is being cut off, but at the bottom of this drop down when you right click is something called Keyframe Assistant. Just go to Easy Ease, and that will make our keyframes look much better, a little bit less linear. If you're looking at the keyframe graph, you can see they're now very smooth, and before, if we go to the keyframe graph, they were very sharp. So that just it helps to make everything a little bit more natural. So let's Easy Ease those again, and let's preview this to see how good that looks. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. That seems to be fine for now. We can come back to adjust it later if need be, but I think our camera keyframes are done for now. Let's move on to something called the small particulates, and we're going to create those with CC Particle World. Okay, so go up to Composition, New Composition. We're going to call this Small Particulates, and hit OK. So create a new solid with Control Y, and we'll just make this a darkish light gray. That'll be fine. And we're going to apply CC Particle World. And to save yourself some time and myself from making mistakes, we used an animation preset. Small particulates will be included with the project file. So if we just see what shows up here right away, we see some grayish brown particles falling from the sky. And I'll just run through the settings so you know exactly what I did. Birth rate is 1, longevity is 3.14, producer we have 0, negative 0.32, 0, 0.1, 0, and 0.02. For physics, we chose viscous. velocity is 1, inherent velocity is 0, gravity is 0.02, resistance is 0, extra is 0.6, extra angle is 1 and 0. Particle. Darken and faded sphere is our particle type. I alt-clicked on birth size actually, and I just pick whipped it to death size because I was changing the size all the time, and if you do it this way, if you change death size, birth size will be automatically updated. So that'll save you some time if you ever are changing some settings all the time, and they need to be linked together. Size variation is 0. Max opacity is 70. Birth color is 8A8C76, and death color is the same. No camera settings changed, but under options here, just make sure that you turn on motion blur with this checkbox right down here. So, now that we have our particles moving from the top to the bottom, I think it's time that we get them moving in the proper direction. So let's scale this this layer up and rotate it until it looks something like this. And we just need to scale it up until it doesn't cut off on the corners there. And we can now see that the particles are going sort of from the left, the lower left, to the upper right. And what I did with the rotation is I created a keyframe, and then I went to the end and I created another keyframe, and then we select them both, and we go to the wiggler. If you don't have the wiggler, just open Window and check the wiggler. It got cut off, but it's down there somewhere. And I changed the frequency to 0.5, magnitude 25, and if we hit apply, and you watch that red box there, you'll see that there's plenty of variation in the particles movement. So that's one way to do it. Let's duplicate this solid. And what I'd like to do is go into the rotation. You can close this up now. And let's just get rid of these keyframes like that and delete. And we're going to create new rotation. But first, we need to make sure that we are going in the opposite direction. So, like that. It doesn't need to be perfect, but then we can go to the end, create a new keyframe, and apply wiggler. So now we have two layers that are creating small particulates, and they are going in the opposite direction. Now, you'll notice that we have sort of a mirror image here, and that's because we are using the same settings in CC Particle World. And we could adjust some settings in CC Particle World to get different looking particles, or we could just create sort of a pre-run here. So let's move this one over like this. And now, if we watch, we don't have that mirror effect anymore, but we do need to change our keyframes so that they are fixed. So let's just turn them off, go to the beginning, and rotate until we are in the proper positioning. And keyframe, go to the end, keyframe, select them both, apply wiggler, and now, if we preview this, we have some excellent looking bubbles or whatever. That is perfect. Okay, so the next step we're going to take is bring this back into our full view. So let's go into full view here and drag our small particulates into the comps folder, and then drag it just above the water layers. Okay, so to keep this as lean as possible, I'm not going to try to have CC Particle World be affected by the depth of field of the camera. Instead, we're just going to sort of fake it with fast blur. So open up the focus distance so that it's visible, and we're just going to line up some keyframes with fast blur so that they match the depth of field. So we're starting off very blurred out, so let's just change the blurriness to about 80. And then we're going to move forward here, and you can see why we have this open now. We're just going to press this little button so that we get on the same frame. So now we have gone and overshot completely, and we would be focused on the farthest plane now, which would be these fast blurred particles. So let's just change it to like 12, and let's move back up, and we're just going to increase the blurriness to maybe 40 now. And then let's just go one more, and let's bring the blurriness down to about, I would say, 15. And if we just preview this, we can see that the small particulates now sort of follow along with the changing depth of field, which is exactly what we want. So now I think we're going to use particular, and we're going to add the large particulates, which will go in front of particular. Okay, so to create these large particles, let's create a new solid with Control Y, and we're going to apply particular. And again, we're going to be using an animation preset. It's called Large Blurry Particles. And if we just solo this layer, we can sort of get an idea of what this particle system is going to look like. So we just have spheres, or circles perhaps, of varying sizes and colors passing in front of the camera. Not anything too advanced, and they don't pass through the camera particularly, oh, there I go with those puns again. They don't pass in front of the camera very often, but when they do, it's just an extra detail that sells the shot. So we're going to do something kind of similar to what we did down here with small particulates. We're going to scale this up to maybe 210 or so, and we're going to change the rotation until we are about there. That looks nice. And again, we're just going to use the wiggler to rotate. So let's just turn the magnitude for this one down to about 15, and then hit apply. So now we have these larger particles passing in front of the camera every once in a while, and let's just run through the settings that I used. So let's call this large, and here we go. The emitter, particles per second, is 50. It's a box emitter. Position Z is -640. And I think the rest of these are default settings, but emitter size is 0. And I think that wraps that up. So particle life is 3. It's a sphere. The sphere feather is 0. Size is 18. Size random is 0. Size over life is solid. Opacity, the only thing I changed is I used this little preset here to have it have the particle slowly fade out over the 3-second life span. Color is BFC to B0. Color random is 10, and that just gives us a little bit of a diversity. And there are no shading settings. I don't think there are any physics settings, but just as I scroll through here, make sure that you have these just typed in. And I don't believe, yeah, we don't have auxiliary. We didn't make any changes to the world transform. No changes to visibility or rendering either. So it's a pretty simple particle system. And I think if we just turn off the solo and we let it render out for just a second here. Okay, so it's rendered out, and we can sort of see the occasional particle pass in front of the camera. If I just zoom up to about 100% here, you can get a better idea of what it looks like. But I think, if anything, we should probably just increase the particles per second so there's a greater chance of something passing in front of the camera. So if you would like, you can go into the emitter settings and just change that number, but I think I'm fine with the amount of large particles passing right now. So Next up, I think we're going to just add some very quick shadows to this particular layer. So to make shadows, let's begin by duplicating particular, and let's drag it underneath the first one and call it shadows. And now let's apply a tint to the second particular layer, and let's just solo this so that we see what we're doing here. And we're just going to map white to black, and that'll just make our shadows pretty dark. And also, if we just jump ahead here, we'll see our shadows are way too crisp. So let's add a fast blur to take care of that. Blurriness is going to be 125. And let's unsolo this to take a look at our shadows in action. I think we do need to make the opacity about 50%, but after that it looks pretty good. So let's add some finishing touches. If you've ever looked through a microscope in college or high school, maybe even middle school, you'll know that there's an arrow usually in the field of view. So let's go into our elements here and drag out that arrow that we made in Photoshop. I think we do need to scale this arrow down a bit, so let's change it to maybe 65%, and let's move it so that it is just on the edge there. And normally your arrow would be pointing to the subject that you're studying, but since our cells are moving around, I don't think that's going to be the case. The other thing that you may have noticed at the beginning of the video is the lens cover that rotates out of view. So let's just create that pretty easily with Control Y for a new solid. And I'm just going to use the ellipse tool to make a new circle. With Shift, you can make a perfect circle, and space I'm going to use to center that circle up. So when you have something that just takes up almost the entire height of the comp, you can let go your mouse button, and I'm just going to move it so that it is a little bit more centered here. So let's use the pan behind tool to move the anchor point up to the top, and that looks good. And let's just solo this so that we can focus just on getting the motion of this lens cover correct. So let's call this lens cover, and let's press R to bring up our rotation. So let's press the stopwatch and jump ahead maybe 7 frames maybe. It's not too slow of an animation. We want this to happen pretty quickly. So we just needed to get out of view there. And let's just preview that. If we just simply press N on the keyboard, we can constrain our timeline to just that section, and it'll loop for us, and we can make sure that we don't skip any frames. I think it could be even faster than 7 seconds. Let's make it 6 frames, that is. Okay, cool. So let's just drag this back up, and let's unsolo this. Okay, so we do have the lens completed, and the thing I'm going to notice here is that after the lens comes up, we do have those camera keyframes to deal with. So let's just move the keyframes so that they take effect right after the lens cover comes up. So let's just move them over here, and maybe just a few frames for the viewer to get an idea of what's going on. And so the lens comes up, and then the keyframes start, and I think that just helps the shot a little bit. So that just about does it for the full view. And now I think we're just going to go over to Magic Bullet Looks and finish up this shot. As a quick tip, whether you're rendering out with or without Magic Bullet Looks, I suggest that you solo particular and shadows, and then go up to Composition, Add to Render Queue, go to Best Settings, use OpenGL if you've got it, go to Lossless, and change the channels to RGB plus alpha and hit OK. Don't change the format or compression settings and render this video file out. Then you can go back into the full view comp and replace two of the most render heavy layers that you've got with a single video file. This is beneficial just because if you have to change a single setting, you won't have to go and render out the majority of your time with two layers that were already correct. You'll just have a video file, and if you are rendering without Magic Bullet Looks, you'll see that we don't have to render those two particular layers 3 times. So this is a great idea for future projects as well, and you'll probably spend hours if you don't actually render out separate sections individually and then bring them back in as video files. I use this technique all the time and it's saved me hours. So I highly suggest this before you move on to the next section, but we'll see you over there. Okay, so let's hit Control N on the keyboard for a new comp, and let's call this Microscope FOV for Field of View, and hit OK. And we're just going to drag Microscope Field of View up into the comps folder, and then drag down Full View. And let's apply Magic Bullet Looks. And let's jump ahead to the 3-second mark so that we can actually see some of the frame here. And I'll adjust this window so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So we're going to go into the Looks panel on the left, and under Popular Film is a preset called Blockbuster. Just click that once and it'll apply it. And the next thing we need to do is go over to the tools on the right and add Chromatic Aberration. So I'm going to increase the Chromatic Aberration to about 5 in the red cyan channel. And then we can actually delete Auto Shoulder because it doesn't do anything for us, so we don't need that taking up our render time. As for curves, I'm just actually going to delete curves. I like it the way it is. It looks a little bit hazier, a little bit more naturalistic and less contrasty. And the last thing we need to do is adjust the vignette. So I'm going to bring the radius down so it takes up about the height of the comp, and I'm going to adjust the spread in the negative direction so that we make that transition from the vignette to black a little bit sharper, and I'm going to increase the strength to 100. So that about does it for Magic Bullet Looks. Pretty simple, and I'm just going to hit OK. If you don't happen to have Magic Bullet Looks, I'm going to actually go through how you would do this similar effect without it. So if you have Magic Bullet Looks, you are done. Congratulations. I hope you like the final effect. My name is Grayson Honan for AE Tuts. But if you do not have Magic Bullet Looks, stay tuned and I will explain how you would do this without it. Okay, so you're sticking around because you don't have Magic Bullet Looks. The first thing I need you to do is bring in your full view comp and then mask it with a circular mask. You want your feather radius to be about 28 pixels and then add a black solid so that you have a background. Then you can duplicate this layer twice. One needs to be tinted and then you need to map white to blue, and then the other one needs to be map white to red. Then let's take a look at our position here. You can see that the position for the top 2 layers is offset by 5 pixels, and if we look at the opacity, you can see that the top 2 layers are 25% opaque. So that takes care of the chromatic aberration look. We can see that we're ghosting red on the left and blue on the right, and now we can go into the coloration part. So let's fit up to 100% here. Adjustment layer looks like this. We've got curves first, and in the RGB channel I just increased the brightness all around because if we don't, you can see we're really lacking in the brightness department. When we've got those 2 layers there, we really do lose quite a lot of the brightness. So if we go into the red, it looks something like this. Green, we did nothing to. Blue, we decreased. And let's see, hue saturation, I increased by 45, and that's without. This is with. It really does need the saturation, so I just added that in there. We've got a glow. This is supposed to sort of simulate the diffusion that you would get with Magic Bullet Looks. We've got a glow threshold of 63.1, glow radius of 54, glow intensity of 0.3. And curves, let's see, we've got RGB looking like this. We're increasing highlights, decreasing shadows. Red is got nothing, green, nothing, blue. We're increasing the shadows and almost doing nothing to the highlights. So that about wraps it up. It's pretty simple. We just sort of added these two layers to get the chromatic aberration look, and then we adjusted everything with some curves, glow, and hue saturation. Let me just show you what it looks like in full frame here, and then I'll show you Magic Bullet looks. I'm really fond of this look. It just seems a little bit more professional, but if this is all you've got, it's not bad, but I don't know, I would probably spend my next paycheck on Magic Bullet looks. It's really pretty helpful. I was able to finish that look in maybe 2 minutes. Meanwhile, I spent maybe 5 or 10 on this one. So that's all I've got. This is just a little supplement to help those without Magic Bullet looks. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. And my name is Grayson Honan. I'll see you next time.